0 minutes. There comes a very particular moment in the journey of every survivor of narcissistic abuse. It is a moment that appears calm on the outside, yet internally it feels as though the ground beneath your feet has suddenly shifted, while no one around you seems to notice. 007. It is the moment when the person who has been shaping your reality looks into your eyes and realizes, perhaps for the very first time, that you finally see who they truly are. Not the carefully crafted version, not the charming mask, not the wounded hero, not the misunderstood partner, not the endlessly patient friend. You finally recognize the pattern. 034. You recognize the manipulation. You recognize the strategy hidden beneath the affection. And in that instant, something changes in their eyes. The illusion they worked so hard to maintain has begun to crack, and they know it. 047. Maybe you felt it as an unexpected chill in the room. Maybe it appeared as an awkward silence during the conversation. Maybe it was only a brief flash of panic behind an otherwise calm expression. 055. That moment is one of the most dangerous points in the entire story of narcissistic abuse. At the same time, it is one of the clearest moments you will ever experience. Understanding what happens next can completely change the direction of your healing journey. 103. Before we continue, if protecting your peace, rebuilding your identity, and understanding how manipulation actually works matter to you, consider subscribing to this channel. Everything shared here is rooted in genuine psychological insight, trauma-informed understanding, and the real experiences of survivors who are slowly learning to trust themselves again. 124. When you subscribe, you give yourself continued access to knowledge that gradually restores your inner world, one honest realization at a time. You also become part of a community choosing clarity instead of confusion and self-respect instead of constant self-doubt. 139. Now let us return to that turning point, because what happens inside a narcissistic person when they realize you know the truth is not random. It follows a recognizable pattern, even though it may appear slightly different from one person to another. 148. At the center of narcissistic behavior is the need to protect a carefully constructed self-image. That identity depends heavily on the way other people perceive them. 157. The moment you begin seeing through that image, you stop reflecting the version of themselves they rely on to feel emotionally secure. In their mind, you become a threat, not because you are hostile, not because you are cruel, but because your clarity shatters the mirror they have depended on to protect their fragile sense of self. 221. And once that mirror begins to crack, the response is rarely calm. The first thing you may notice is that the old, confusing behaviors become even stronger. 229. Gaslighting grows more intense, more frequent, and increasingly sophisticated. 232. Suddenly, conversations you clearly remember are rewritten right in front of you. Events you carefully documented are completely denied. Feelings you openly expressed become twisted into overreactions or imaginary wounds. 240. This escalation does not prove that you are mistaken. It means your accuracy has become something they simply cannot tolerate. The more clearly you understand the dynamic, the harder they work to shake your confidence in your own perception. 254. Because your steady perception is the one thing their charm cannot control. You may notice the gaslighting becoming more confident than before, almost as though they are challenging you to question yourself. 302. Small details begin changing first. Dates, words, the order of events. Then larger parts of your shared history begin to shift until you are left wondering whether an entire conversation that you clearly remember ever happened. 318. This is not coincidence, and it is not your memory failing you. It is a deliberate and sometimes unconscious attempt to make the ground beneath you feel unstable once again, because someone who feels emotionally unsteady is much easier to influence. 326. Alongside the gaslighting, you will often notice an increase in blame shifting and projection. 335. Things they have done themselves suddenly become accusations directed at you. You become the manipulator, the cold one, the unstable one, the person who refuses to let go of the past. 343. This is not always a calculated lie. In many situations, it comes from a deep psychological defense mechanism. The narcissistic person cannot tolerate the version of themselves you are now beginning to recognize. 353. So they unconsciously place those same qualities onto you instead. It becomes a way of protecting their own self-image by making you carry the truth they refuse to face. 4 o'clock. You may find yourself defending choices you never actually made or explaining emotions you never truly felt, simply because the story being told about you has drifted so far away from reality. 409. This creates a very particular kind of exhaustion because you are no longer debating simple opinions. You are struggling to hold on to a version of reality that keeps being challenged from every direction. 425. It helps to remember that projection like this reveals far more about the person using it than it ever reveals about you. The qualities they accuse you of often belong to them. The mirror is simply facing the wrong direction. 434. Then comes the performance of victimhood. 440. This stage can be especially confusing because the person who caused you pain suddenly behaves as though they are the one being devastated. They may begin to cry. They may speak in a soft, gentle voice. They may describe their suffering in great detail. They may talk about their childhood, their stress, their emotional struggles, or their fear of losing you. 455. Real emotional pain can exist in narcissistic people as well, but pay close attention to the timing. It almost always appears just as accountability is getting closer, just when your clarity has become strongest, just when you are nearest to walking away. The victim narrative may not even seem dishonest to them, yet it still functions as a strategy that repeatedly appears the moment their control begins slipping away. 516. Watching someone you deeply care about display such convincing pain can shake even the most emotionally grounded survivor. You may find yourself comforting them during the exact moment you should have been leaving, apologizing for hurting them when, in reality, you have been carrying the pain for much longer. 532. This is one of the cruelest parts of the entire pattern because it turns your own empathy into the very tool that pulls you back into the cycle. 536. Recognizing this does not mean you become cold or stop caring. It simply means you begin noticing when your compassion is being used against you instead of being received with honesty and responsibility. 544. If the role of the victim no longer works, intimidation often becomes the next strategy. Sometimes it is loud through raised voices, direct threats, or aggressive body language. 554. Other times it is much quieter. Cold stares, long stretches of silence, ominous remarks, or the sudden withdrawal of warmth and affection that feels almost like punishment. 603. The silent treatment is one of the most damaging tactics during this stage because it activates the deeply human fear of abandonment while offering you no opportunity to resolve anything. It creates emotional pressure designed to make you question your decision to finally trust what you see. 620. During moments like these, it helps to remember that intimidation, whether obvious or subtle, is not evidence that you failed to keep the peace. It is evidence that the strategies that once worked on you are no longer effective, and another tactic is simply taking their place. 631. Recognizing the behavior for what it truly is, instead of accepting it as something you caused, becomes its own quiet act of strength and resistance. 638. Then, almost unexpectedly, the warmth returns. This is the stage many survivors describe as the most confusing. After the anger, after the silence, after the emotional cruelty, the narcissistic person suddenly appears to become the most loving version of themselves you have ever experienced. 654. This phase is commonly known as hoovering, a term used because it describes the way someone tries to pull you back into the same emotional cycle once again. The compliments suddenly become more intense than before. The apologies sound carefully prepared, yet somehow deeply emotional at the same time. The promises to change begin to feel almost convincing, making it easy to wonder whether this time could really be different. There may be thoughtful gifts, grand gestures, references to special memories you shared, or unexpected moments of vulnerability that seem to confirm everything you once wished was true about them. This pattern is known as intermittent reinforcement, and it is one of the most powerful conditioning mechanisms in human psychology. Rewards that appear unpredictably after periods of emotional pain create far stronger attachments than consistent kindness ever could. That is exactly why trauma bonds often feel almost chemical, almost magnetic, even after you clearly understand what has been happening. You may catch yourself replaying the good memories over and over, holding on to them as evidence that the relationship was genuine, even while the painful memories exist right beside them. Both realities can exist at the same time. The affection often felt genuine in the moment it was expressed. At the same time, it was also part of a repeating cycle that kept you emotionally connected to someone who continued to hurt you. Simply naming that cycle, even if only to yourself, begins to weaken its hold. A pattern you can clearly recognize is a pattern you can eventually step away from. Understanding this is important because many survivors blame themselves for finding it difficult to leave, even after they fully recognize the truth. They wonder why seeing things clearly has not immediately set them free. They question why their heart still longs for someone their mind already knows is harmful. The answer is not weakness. The answer is that your nervous system adapted to months or even years of unpredictable emotional experiences. It learned to connect relief, hope, comfort, and love with the very person who repeatedly caused pain. Healing requires more than intellectual understanding. It also requires a slow, patient retraining of the way your body responds to that emotional attachment. Meanwhile, outside the relationship itself, another familiar pattern often begins to emerge. Image management becomes even more important to the narcissistic person. They grow increasingly focused on how they appear to mutual friends, relatives, co-workers, acquaintances, or even people online. You may begin noticing subtle stories that quietly present them as the reasonable one while casting you as the difficult or unstable person. In more serious situations, this develops into a full smear campaign where carefully selected stories are shared with people within your social circle. The goal is rarely revenge alone. The deeper purpose is to control the narrative before your version of events has a chance to settle in anyone else's mind. If they define your character first, it becomes much easier for others to dismiss your perspective. You may eventually hear a version of events that sounds so different from reality, it almost feels unbelievable. Mutual friends may slowly become distant without ever explaining why. Family members may begin choosing sides based on whoever spoke first or spoke the loudest. This can feel like a second betrayal layered on top of the first, because it appears to confirm your greatest fear that telling the truth will cost you the people you hoped would understand. Yet the people who genuinely know your character and who are willing to look beyond the easiest explanation often find their way back with time. This is frequently the stage when survivors experience an overwhelming sense of isolation because people they once trusted begin treating them differently. It is painful, it is deeply confusing, and it is also one of the most important moments to remember that truth does not require everyone's agreement in order to remain true. Your reality does not become less valid simply because someone else tells a different story. Your healing is not dependent on convincing other people. It depends on trusting what you know and continuing to live according to that truth. If these words resonate with you and you want to continue building the kind of inner clarity that manipulation cannot easily shake, consider subscribing to this channel. It was created for survivors who are ready to move beyond confusion and into a deeper understanding of themselves, their patterns, and the psychology behind everything they experienced. Every video is designed to help you reclaim another piece of yourself that was quietly taken away and rebuild your life on a foundation that cannot be easily shaken again. Now let us turn our attention inward because while understanding another person's behavior is valuable, what is happening inside you during this stage matters even more. When you first recognize the manipulation, the feeling is rarely one of simple relief. More often, it is a confusing mixture of clarity and grief, awareness and uncertainty, validation and emotional disorientation all at once. You may feel as though you are slowly waking from a dream you cannot fully remember, with scattered memories suddenly fitting together in ways that are almost too painful to face. This is completely normal. Your mind is reorganizing itself around a truth that once felt too unsafe to acknowledge. At first, clarity often feels frightening rather than empowering because it asks you to grieve much more than the relationship itself. It asks you to mourn the version of reality you believed you were living. You grieve the person you believed they were. You grieve the future you imagined together. You grieve the time, love, and energy you invested. You grieve the parts of yourself that became smaller or changed shape simply to keep the relationship alive. Beneath all of that, you may also grieve the version of yourself that existed before this experience transformed you. This grief is not evidence of weakness or confusion. It is evidence that you are finally processing something deeply real. It can feel strange to grieve someone who is still alive, still present, and perhaps still connected to your life in some way. But you are not grieving only a person. You are grieving an idea you carried for a very long time, an idea of who they might one day become or who you believed they already were. Allow that grief to take whatever form it needs. It may come as tears, anger, emotional numbness, or unexpected waves of sadness in the middle of an ordinary day. There is no wrong way to move through it, and there is no fixed timeline you must follow. Alongside that grief, you may notice another familiar feeling beginning to appear: self-doubt. Even after finally seeing the truth, you may question yourself more than ever before. This happens because long-term exposure to gaslighting teaches the nervous system to distrust its own instincts. Even after your mind has connected all the pieces, your body may still hesitate to believe what you know. Healing this is not about forcing certainty overnight. It is about gently and repeatedly choosing to trust yourself in small moments until self-trust becomes your natural way of living instead of an occasional act of courage. This is also why writing things down becomes such a quietly powerful practice. Recording events as they happen, making notes after conversations, or writing your feelings in real time creates an external record that cannot later be rewritten by someone else's version of events. It is not about preparing for a legal battle. It is about grounding yourself in your own lived experience so that when manipulation attempts to reshape your memories, you have something solid to return to. This simple habit is one of the most overlooked tools in recovering from narcissistic abuse because it slowly restores the relationship between you and your own perception. Even a brief note written on your phone or a few honest sentences recorded immediately after something happens can become a powerful anchor months later when self-doubt begins to return. You do not need to write perfectly or include every detail. You only need to write honestly before anyone else has the opportunity to reshape the experience for you. Over time, reading those small records again can become a quiet yet deeply meaningful source of validation. You will eventually see, in your own words written before any argument, apology, or emotional appeal had the chance to soften the memory, exactly what happened and exactly how it felt. As your healing continues, you will begin recognizing the difference between genuine accountability and a carefully crafted performance. This becomes one of the most liberating lessons you can learn. Real accountability is steady and consistent. It does not appear only when the relationship feels like it is slipping away. It does not revolve around the feelings of the person who caused the harm. It does not demand immediate forgiveness or quick reconciliation. Instead, it reveals itself through lasting behavioral change, patience with your healing process, the absence of pressure, and the willingness to sit with discomfort without rushing to erase it. A manipulative performance, by contrast, almost always carries a sense of urgency. It needs an immediate response. It wants you to soften your boundaries. It hopes you will open the door once again. It uses displays of vulnerability as a strategy rather than an honest emotional expression. Once you learn to recognize that difference, the performance begins losing much of its influence because you stop confusing emotional intensity with genuine emotional truth. A helpful question to ask yourself is surprisingly simple. Does this change require anything from them, or does it only require more from you? Real growth usually asks the person changing to face discomfort. A performance almost always transfers that discomfort back onto you, asking you to become more patient, more forgiving, more understanding, while very little truly changes on their side. You may also begin noticing temporary periods of improvement that often follow moments of exposure. The narcissistic person may sincerely appear different for days, weeks, or even months. They may attend therapy, read books, speak fluently about healing, and seem completely transformed. Then, little by little, the familiar behaviors begin returning. Often they come back more subtly than before, more polished, and more difficult to recognize. This is not always a deliberate act of deception. Sometimes the effort to change is genuine, but remains only surface deep, lasting just long enough to regain emotional access. Real transformation is uncommon and usually unfolds very slowly. It rarely announces itself or asks to be praised. Instead, it quietly develops over years without needing an audience. Throughout this process, protecting your nervous system becomes essential. Emotional regulation is not a luxury during recovery. It is a necessary survival skill. Practices such as slow, intentional breathing, grounding yourself through your senses, gentle physical movement, spending time in nature, getting genuine rest, and reducing unnecessary overstimulation all help remind your body what safety feels like again. You do not have to force yourself to heal faster. You only need to create the conditions that allow healing to happen naturally. Your body heals according to its own rhythm, not according to anyone else's timeline. Some days that regulation may look like taking a peaceful walk outside. Other days, it may simply mean sitting quietly with a warm cup of tea and allowing yourself to rest without guilt. Both are equally valuable. The goal is never to perform wellness for other people. The goal is to offer your nervous system enough small, repeated reminders that the danger has passed so it can gradually begin trusting that safety is possible again. Boundaries become another quiet foundation of recovery. A boundary is not a wall, nor is it a punishment. It is simply a clear expression of what you will and will not participate in, whether or not someone else agrees with it. With narcissistic individuals, boundaries are often tested repeatedly. sometimes through charm, sometimes through anger, sometimes through guilt. The strength of a boundary is never measured by another person's reaction. It is measured by how consistently you continue honoring it yourself. Over time, that consistency rebuilds the inner authority that manipulation worked so hard to weaken. It also helps to avoid unnecessary confrontations during this stage. Many survivors feel a powerful desire to explain themselves, defend their perspective, or finally make the other person understand what really happened. That urge is completely human because it comes from hoping that understanding will finally bring closure. Yet closure in these situations rarely arrives through the other person. It usually develops quietly within you. Repeated confrontations often provide nothing more than additional opportunities for manipulation, more chances for your words to be twisted, and new openings for emotional escalation. Every explanation you offer can be dissected, reframed, or later presented as evidence that you are somehow difficult, dramatic, or obsessive. It is a painful truth, but an important one to accept. You are not dealing with someone who is simply waiting for the right explanation before they finally understand. You are dealing with a pattern that actively resists understanding because true understanding would require genuine accountability. Sometimes the strongest response is the quietest one. Sometimes the most freeing decision is to stop trying to be understood by someone whose understanding was never emotionally safe in the first place. Rebuilding your identity may be the most delicate part of the entire journey. After living through prolonged manipulation, many survivors discover they no longer fully recognize themselves. Their preferences, opinions, dreams, and even ordinary daily habits may have slowly adjusted themselves around another person's emotional world. Reclaiming your identity becomes a slow and curious process of asking gentle questions. What do you genuinely enjoy? What do you truly believe? What kind of rest actually restores you? Which people help you feel most like yourself? Asked gently and repeatedly, these questions slowly rebuild the inner world that was quietly rearranged without your full awareness. You may rediscover an old hobby you abandoned years earlier. You may notice yourself expressing an opinion without first checking how someone else might react. Those moments may seem small or even insignificant at first, yet they are actually the foundation of a new life being built one quiet piece at a time, a version of yourself that belongs completely to you. Again, self-validation becomes one of the strongest foundations of healing. For a long time, you may have relied on someone else to confirm your experiences before you felt able to trust them. Healing means gradually learning to offer that confirmation to yourself. When a memory returns, you can acknowledge it. When an emotion rises, you can honor it. When your intuition quietly speaks, you can choose to listen without needing endless proof. This does not mean shutting yourself off from healthy feedback. It simply means you stop handing your reality over to people who have already shown they are willing to distort it. Support systems matter deeply throughout recovery. But the quality of that support matters far more than the number of people surrounding you. A small group of people who listen without judgment, hold space without trying to rescue you, and believe your experience without demanding every possible detail is worth far more than a large circle of well-meaning but confused observers. When available, working with a trauma-informed therapist can be especially valuable because narcissistic abuse follows unique patterns that benefit from specialized understanding. If therapy is not available right now, support groups, honest conversations with trusted friends, or thoughtfully chosen books and educational resources can still provide meaningful comfort and guidance. What matters most is that the support you lean on truly sees you for who you are, instead of filtering your experience through assumptions or misunderstandings. As your clarity continues growing, you will begin noticing unhealthy patterns much earlier in future relationships, not through fear or paranoia, but through calm, steady discernment.